The auction barn in Colfax County, Nebraska, smelled the way it always did in October. Wet straw, manure, and the particular diesel sweetness of the loader tractor idling behind the south gate. Arlen Booth arrived on a Thursday morning in the fall of 1958, parked his '51 Ford pickup on the gravel lot, and walked in through the side entrance with his hands in his coat pockets and $340 in cash folded in his shirt pocket. He was 34 years old, had been running a small cow-calf operation outside Schuyler since 1951 on 80 rented acres. 12 cows, 1 bull, a calf crop that averaged 10 to 11 head a year. Nothing extraordinary. Enough to keep the operation moving and make the land payment to Orville Gerdes, who owned the ground and had the patience of a man who'd seen a lot of young farmers come and go and preferred to keep a known quantity on his land. Arlen was not at the auction to buy breeding stock. He was there to look at a set of replacement heifers from the Dunbar operation south of Columbus, which were supposed to run through the ring around mid-morning. Good bloodlines on the Dunbar cattle. He'd heard about them at the feed store. The Dunbar heifers ran at 1040. They were good animals, solid and even. They sold at $148 apiece, 7 of them. Arlen bid to $130 on the first one and stopped. He didn't have the reach for $148, not without cutting into operating money he couldn't afford to cut. He sat in the stands after the Dunbar cattle cleared and watched the next consignment come through. They came in wrong. That was the first thing you noticed. Thin, most of them, with the dull coat that means something has been working on an animal for a while. 14 head of mixed breeding age cows, the oldest probably 8 or 9, the youngest maybe 4. The consignor's tag on the gate said the cattle were from the Rennick estate, which Arlen knew by reputation. An old German family that had run a dairy operation east of Clarkson before the father died in the spring, and the sons had split the land and liquidated everything. The auctioneer read from his notes. 14 head, mixed age, sold as is, estate dispersal. No health records available. He paused after that last part. No health records available. In an auction barn in 1958, that sentence carried weight. The bidding opened at $40 for the lot. It went to $80, then $120. It stopped at $120 for a long moment. 2 men in the stands looked at each other. One of them shook his head. Arlen bid $140. The auctioneer looked at him, called for more. Nobody moved. Arlen bid $160. Still nobody. He bid $200, and the auctioneer's hand came down. 14 cows, $200 for the lot, $14.28 per head. The man sitting 2 rows up from Arlen, a cattle buyer named Gus Faring who ran order buying out of Columbus, laughed out loud. Not unkindly. Just the laugh of a man who had seen a lot of auctions and knew what no health records available meant when it was attached to cows that came into the ring, walking the way those cows had walked. Gus said, loud enough for the row to hear, that Arlen had just bought himself $200 worth of trouble. The man next to Gus said he'd be lucky to get $10 a head at the rendering plant. Arlen loaded the cattle into his trailer and drove home. His wife, Marta, was in the yard when he pulled in. She looked at the trailer. She looked at him. He told her what he'd paid. She asked why. He told her he wasn't sure yet. That was not entirely true. He had a reason, though it was not a fully formed one. He had grown up on his father's farm outside of Stanton, and his father had kept a small dairy herd through the 1930s and into the 40s. His father was not a trained veterinarian, but he had a working knowledge of cattle disease that came from 30 years of watching animals and reading whatever extension publications he could get his hands on. He had taught Arlen to look at cattle the way a mechanic looks at an engine, not just at what was broken, but at what the brake told you about the rest of the machine. Arlen had looked at those 14 cows in the ring for 4 minutes before he bid. He had looked at their coats, their eyes, their movement. The the condition of their hooves. He had looked at the way they held their heads. He had formed a theory, tentative and possibly wrong, about what was working on them. The symptoms pointed toward two things: pink eye in several animals, easily treated, and what looked like the aftermath of a long-running mineral deficiency, most likely selenium, which was a known problem in parts of Colfax County where the soil ran low. Selenium deficiency in cattle produces a syndrome called white muscle disease in calves. But in adult animals, it shows up more slowly. Poor coat, low weight, reduced immune function, general thriftlessness. Not flashy. Not obvious unless you knew what you were looking at. Easy to mistake for general poor condition, which is what most of the auction barn that day had taken it for. If he was right, the fix was straightforward. Selenium supplementation, either through selenium-fortified salt blocks or injectable selenium and vitamin E, if the deficiency was severe. Pink eye treatment, oxytetracycline, standard of care. Time and feed. If he was wrong, Gus Faring was right. He called Dr. Emil Horak in Schuyler the next morning. Horak had been the large animal vet in that part of Colfax County for 12 years. He drove out on Friday afternoon, examined all 14 animals, and spent 40 minutes in the barn making notes. His assessment was measured. He agreed on the pink eye, 7 animals showing it, varying degrees of severity. On the mineral question, he was less certain. He said the coat and condition symptoms were consistent with selenium deficiency, but could also indicate other factors. Internal parasites, poor quality feed, something else entirely that the estate liquidation hadn't documented. He recommended a full deworming as a baseline, selenium supplementation through salt, and injectable selenium for the 3 animals he considered in the worst condition. He also recommended blood work on 2 animals to confirm. The blood work came back 10 days later. Selenium levels were low in both samples. Not critically low, but below the reference range, and low enough to explain the symptom pattern across the group. Arlen bought 6 50-pound selenium-fortified salt blocks at $3.40 apiece from the co-op in Schuyler. He purchased oxytetracycline for the pink eye cases at $4.80 per bottle, used 2 bottles across the 7 affected animals. He bought 3 doses of injectable selenium and vitamin E at $1.20 per dose. He hired Horak back for 1 follow-up visit at $18 for the call. Total veterinarian treatment cost, $62 to $80. Total investment in the herd, $262 to $80. He put the 14 cows in his best pasture, the 20-acre field on the north end of the rented ground that had the most grass and the cleanest water from the creek. He fed them better than he fed his own cows that winter, which Marta noted without criticism and without complaint. He watched them. The pink eye cleared in the 7 affected animals over 6 weeks, the worst cases taking longer, 1 animal losing partial vision in the left eye before the infection resolved. The coat condition began improving by December. By February, 4 months after the auction, the 3 worst animals had gained weight visibly. Their coats were coming in. Their eyes were clear. By spring of 1959, Arlan's assessment was confirmed. 13 of the 14 cows were fully recovered and in workable condition. The 14th, the oldest cow in the group, an 8-year-old of indeterminate breeding who had probably been in the worst condition at purchase, died in January of a respiratory infection that Horak believed was secondary to her compromised immune state at the time of purchase. She was a loss. 13 cows, $262.80 in total costs, minus 1. He put them to his bull in the spring of 1959, a Hereford bull he'd bought 3 years earlier from the Stanislav operation near Howells, good-tempered and proven. The bull worked the 14, the 13 survivors plus 1 of his original cows he added to the group to round the numbers. The calf crop from that group in the winter of 1959 to 1960 was 12 calves. 11 survived to weaning. He sold 7 steers in October 1960 at $22.40 per hundredweight, averaging 480 pounds at sale. 107.52 per head. 7 head, 752.64. He kept 4 heifers as replacements. The original 262.80 investment had returned 752.64 in calf sales in the first crop year, not counting the retained heifers, which he valued at $95 apiece at 1960 prices. Total value generated in the first 24 months, $132.64. He did not calculate this and announce it anywhere. He put the money back into the operation. What he did do, quietly, over the following 2 years, was cull his original 12 cows against the recovered rennet cattle. His original cows were mixed breeding, some of them good, some of them adequate, 1 or 2 that had never been strong producers. The rennet cows, once recovered, turned out to be better animals than their auction day condition had suggested. Several of them were Shorthorn Cross, a breed that had been popular in the Clarkson area during the dairy years. And Shorthorn cattle, once in good condition, are efficient foragers and solid mothers. By 1961, he had culled 6 of his original 12 and replaced them with the recovered rennet cattle and their first-generation daughters. His herd in 1961 was not the same herd he'd had in 1958. It was better. Gus Faring came through the county in the fall of 1961, doing order buying for a feedlot operation out of Grand Island. He stopped at Arlan's place on a Thursday afternoon, having been directed there by a man at the Schuyler Co-op who told him Arlan was running calves worth looking at. Arlan showed him the pen of weaned steers he had ready for fall sale. 12 head, averaging 510 pounds, Hereford Cross, even, and well-fleshed. Gus looked at them for a while. He asked where the cows had come from. Arlan told him, the Rennick Estate, October 1958. 14 head at $200 for the lot. Gus was quiet. He'd been at that auction. He'd been the man who laughed. He did not bring it up. Arlan did not bring it up. Gus bought the 12 steers at $23.10 per hundredweight, a slight premium over the going rate, which he said was for the evenness of the lot. He wrote the check at Arlan's kitchen table and left. Marta poured coffee after he drove out. Didn't say anything about it. Didn't need to. The following spring, a younger farmer named Dale Vosberg, who rented ground adjacent to Arlan's place, came over one evening in March. He'd been watching Arlan's herd from the road for 2 years and had some questions. He was 26, just starting out, running a few cows on 60 acres. He asked Arlan about buying cattle at estate auctions, about what to look for, about the mineral question. Arlan spent an hour with him at the kitchen table. He explained selenium deficiency and its symptoms. He explained how to read coat condition and eye brightness in an animal under stress. He explained the difference between an animal that was structurally poor and an animal that was temporarily compromised. He showed Dale the notes he'd kept from the Horak examination, the blood work results, the treatment log. Dale wrote it all down in a spiral notebook he'd brought in his shirt pocket. He bought 6 cows at an estate auction in Platte County the following October. He paid $310 for the lot, which worked out to $51.67 per head. He called Horak the next morning. 3 of the 6 were selenium deficient. All 6 had internal parasites. He treated them through the winter and had 5 healthy cows in his pasture by spring. The 6th had been further along than it looked. He bred them in the spring of 1963. His first calf crop from the purchased cows sold in the fall of 1964 at $180 per head average on 7 steers. Dale told 2 other young farmers in the county about the approach over the following year. One of them tried it. One of them didn't. Arlan kept farming in Colfax County until 1979. He had long since moved off the 80 rented acres, and was running 200 head on 320 acres he'd bought from Orville Gerdes in 1967, when Orville decided he'd rather have the cash than the rent checks. The purchase price was $180 per acre. Arlen paid it over 9 years. His cow herd in 1979, the year he handed the operation to his son Keith, traced in part back to the Rennick cattle he'd bought in 1958. Not all of them. 20 years of culling and breeding and replacement had diluted the original genetics considerably. But 3 of the cows in his 1979 herd were third-generation daughters of the Rennick animals, and 2 of those were among the best producers he'd kept. Keith ran the operation for another 18 years, until 1997. Gus Faring retired from order buying in 1971. He'd had a long run and a good one. He told the story of the Rennick auction once, at a retirement dinner in Columbus that fall, as an example of a lesson he'd learned the hard way about making assumptions at an auction barn. He didn't remember Arlen's name correctly. He called him Alan. But he remembered the 14 cows, the $200 bid, and what they turned into. He said it was the cheapest herd in Colfax County history that went on to be one of the best. He was close, not the cheapest. Just the one nobody else was willing to look at, long enough to see what was actually there. The Rennick cattle had not been sick with anything that couldn't be fixed. They'd been low on one mineral and high on neglect. 2 things that 6-to-180 and a winter of good grass could address. Arlen Booth knew that before he bid, or thought he did. He was right enough. The 14 cows he loaded into his trailer on that October Thursday in 1958 became the foundation of a 200-head operation, a land purchase, and a working cattle farm that ran for 40 years under 2 generations. Gus Faring got one good laugh out of it at the auction barn. Arlen got the rest.